The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Illinois.
In 1972, John Bardeen, a professor at the University of Illinois, became the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in physics.
Would it have happened if Bardeen had gone to Harvard, Berkeley, Princeton? I doubt it.
He, without doubt, one of the most distinguished physicists of the 20th century.
These other guys are competing and playing physics with one another. Bardeen's playing physics with God.
John Bardeen's path to scientific greatness began as the Second World War was coming to an end. After World War II, America wanted to have fun. American companies were eager to provide the luxury items that everyone wanted to buy. Their production lines stopped making tanks and started making cars. One of the companies that was booming after the war was AT&T, but they had a problem. Their complex system of telephone lines crisscrossing the country were powered and amplified by vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes powered all electronics.
Vacuum tubes were big, bulky, expensive. They didn't last a long time.
The vacuum tube worked in a way that was similar to a light bulb, but also like a light bulb, it generated a lot of heat and it burned out. By 1945, AT&T's vacuum tubes were reaching their limit. The company needed a new amplifier, something revolutionary. AT&T and its Bell Labs hired the best minds in science to find the answer. One of these minds was John Bardeen.
Oh, John was completely a genius. He was just so smart and so capable and so imaginative.
He knew that he was gifted.
I think my father, in some sense, had a good sense of when to attack.
He wanted to be the guy who found the answer to the big question.
I think arguably more than any scientist alive in the latter part of the 20th century, he changed our world.
At Bell Labs on December 16, 1947, John Bardeen and Walter Brattain invented the point contact transistor. It sparked an electronics revolution.
We knew we were onto something very important, and transistors would have many applications.
You may be able to get music with a flick of your wrist from the so-called Dick Tracy radio. And with a portable television set, you may be able to enjoy video entertainment anywhere you go.
What we now have today that we take for granted are cell phones, laptop computers, internet, home televisions of all kinds, electronic equipment in the hospitals that we all depend on. All of it absolutely depends on the transistor.
With the transistor, we're able to do this incredible amount of processing at great distances, to the point where it becomes magical. In the blink of an eye, that completely changed our relationship to the world around us.
Who knew it would get this big? Who knew? Nobody.
John Bardeen was born on May 23, 1908, in Madison, Wisconsin. The 10-pound boy was the second son of Charles and Althea Bardeen. Charles was the dean of the University Medical School, and Althea was a former teacher from the progressive Dewey School in Chicago. Althea realized that her young son John had a talent for math.
He had a tendency to get very bored when he wasn't challenged, so his mother kept skipping him.
When he was 10 years old, he was able to take algebra. At the end of the course, they had a competition, and my father won the competition.
The fact that John was so much younger than his classmates obviously affected him socially. He just didn't fit in.
Here's this tiny little kid with all these towering people around him.
smarter than anyone else in his class. Somewhere along the line, he figured out for himself, okay, I'm going to keep quiet about the things that I know. My path forward is not going to be one of telling everybody around me how smart I am.
The Bardeen family was devastated when Althea died from breast cancer in 1920. John was shocked by the loss.
I think the strength that he developed made him more able to have the toughness that was necessary not only to survive in the field of physics, but to become one of the leading people.
After his mother's death, John struggled to keep up his grades, but he still managed to finish high school at the age of 13. In 1923, he enrolled at the University of Wisconsin.
John wanted to join the fraternity and actually save some money up. One of the things he did was he played pool, and he was an expert pool player.
There were stories of him hanging out with some of the sports teams, and so even though he was so young, he seemed to be able to get along with people who were older than he was.
John joined the Zeta Psi fraternity and made the varsity swim team.
Sports, in a way, helped him train to be a stronger physicist. Try again philosophy, and practice and practice and practice and build up mastery.
Just as the country was sliding into the Great Depression, Bardeen graduated with a master's in electrical engineering. He was lucky to be offered a position with the Gulf Oil Company. After 3 years at Gulf, Bardeen went back to school at Princeton. He hoped to study with Albert Einstein, but Einstein did not work with students. Bardeen became close friends with fellow physics student Fred Seitz. Seitz was working with his advisor Eugene Wigner on groundbreaking research into materials known as semiconductors. They could both conduct and resist the flow of electricity depending on their condition. After a 5-year courtship, John married biologist and teacher Jane Maxwell on July 18, 1938.
Jane was completely the right kind of wife for John. And he'd known this for some time. He just did not ask her to marry him until he had a job.
In many ways, she helped him become the scientist he was.
In the next decade, Bardeen would invent a device that would change the world and break apart a friendship. In 1938, John and Jane Bardeen settled into a peaceful academic life as John taught physics at the University of Minnesota. But changes loomed on the global landscape. Hitler rose to power in Germany and overran Poland in 1939. It was a signal to many countries to prepare for war. Washington asked scientists to serve the armed forces, and Bardeen heard the call. One of the many technological improvements scientists made for the Allied forces was an advanced radar. They created a far-reaching radar that could see enemy planes and ships even at night. The new radars used a crystal diode using the material silicon or germanium. A diode only allows electricity to flow one way. The crystal diode in the radar converted the radio waves of the radar signal into something that could be seen on a scope.
People had an idea that one might be able to replace vacuum tubes with something made from these materials that made the crystal diodes.
One company that desperately wanted to replace vacuum tubes was AT&T. AT&T's research facility, Bell Labs, asked William Shockley to start a new solid-state research department. The goal of the group was to find a new amplifier and switch for telephone lines. At the end of the war, Bardeen accepted a lucrative offer from Bell Labs. He was hired to work with William Shockley and an experimental physicist named Walter Brattain.
Walter was handy in setting up things and was a considerable experimentalist. But with Bardeen around, with his power of thinking and analyzing and understanding the data, Walter was a great experimentalist.
William Shockley believed they could make an amplifier by using a notion called the field effect. Shockley theorized that an electrical field erected perpendicular to a metal plate, near to but insulated from the surface of a slab of silicon, should draw electrons out of the semiconductor material and create a path of current. But the experiment didn't work. Stumped, Shockley asked Bardeen to try and figure out what was wrong with his field effect design. Bardeen soon had the answer. States at the surface of the semiconductor were trapping the electrons, preventing them from forming the path of current.
By this point, Shockley lost interest and let them work by themselves. So he wasn't in there. I mean, he would be around to talk about things and have meetings and so forth, but he wasn't in the lab.
Using Bardeen's theory of surface states, Brattain and Bardeen struggled on in the lab for months to build a field effect amplifier. They had limited success when they replaced the silicon with a special kind of germanium. They also tried various liquids as the insulator on the surface of the germanium. Eventually, they tried a thin oxide layer that Bardeen saw growing on the semiconductor surface. In one experiment, Brattain accidentally washed the insulator away, so the electrical conductor was in direct contact with the germanium. The accidental contact allowed the injection of positive charge carriers, known as holes, to enter the germanium and modulate the current. Bardeen and Brattain could now design an improved version of the device. Brattain covered a small inverted plastic triangle with gold foil, then cut a razor-thin slit in the bottom. The triangle with the attached two lines of foil was pressed into the germanium slab and carried an electrical current.
And if I put some current in here and get almost all of that out over here, and I put it in at low voltage here and took it out at high voltage here, I have an amplifier. And that's the point contact transistor, and that's the big breakthrough, December 16th, 1947. And then after that, all hell broke loose.
The transistor is very small, very cheap. At that time, one could foresee that very complicated devices could be made out of the transistor.
It was certainly a very exciting day. The fact that you can change the conductivity of a semiconductor by current flow, had it hooked up so you could amplify voice and really show what it could do, and it's really a very exciting day.
John realized what was happening, realized its potential right away, went home quite excited for John, told his wife that something interesting happened at the lab today. She's focused on getting dinner on the table for the family. She said, John, could you wait and tell me about it later? I really have to get dinner ready. Her moment passed.
Bardeen got a different reaction when he shared the good news with Shockley. He was stunned.
I think he was enormously frustrated by the fact that Bardeen and Brattain had found this on their own without any direct involvement of Shockley. But he also took over in saying to Bardeen, I want you only to work on A and B and keep your cotton-picking hands off C, D, and E. That's my territory.
John's personality was such that he was not given argument. He was a deep thinker, and he was a meticulous thinker and all that, but he wasn't a quick tongue guy. And because John would maybe just sit there and not say anything.
He was very, very, very angry, but the anger was mostly bottled up.
Bardeen made a decision to leave Bell Labs. He asked his friend Fred Seitz if he knew of any jobs in academia. Seitz was a physics professor at Illinois. He made a proposal to the dean of the College of Engineering, William Everett.
And Seitz went to Bill Everett and said, we have a chance now to get a real big guy.
Fred understood how smart Bardeen was because he had known him since graduate school.
It took a very good electrical engineering department, a very good physics department, and made them absolutely the best in the world.
Bardeen never forgot the way he was treated by William Shockley. Years later, he was showing a cover of an electronics magazine to Nick Koloniak, and it reminded him of his last years at Bell Labs.
And he says, boy, Walter hates this picture. And I've said, why, John? Is not flattering or something? And he looked at me, he made a face, and his head went like this. No, he says, That's Walter's equipment and our experiments, and Bill didn't have anything to do with it.
During the summer of 1951, John Bardeen moved his wife and 3 children to Champaign, Illinois.
The most important thing that Illinois offered him was a supportive community in which he could solve the problems that he selected to solve.
The Bardeens bought a house near the golf course for John to enjoy his favorite pastime. Bardeen's love of sports extended to football, and he took his family to all the home Illini games.
We went to the Rose Bowl one year when Illinois was playing. I remember he spent hours being catcher as I was a little league pitcher, helping me improve my fastball. Sometimes people think, well, did he sit you down and teach you physics at the breakfast table when you were 5 years old? And, it wasn't that way at all.
Your average really great scientist is not an especially successful father. John was an amazingly successful father.
The fall of 1951, Bardeen led a seminar on the transistor. Sitting in the audience was an electrical engineering graduate student, Nick Holoniak. Bardeen used a small plastic box to demonstrate how the transistor worked. When he turned it on, it played the tune, "How Dry I Am."
And he flipped on the switch and the thing was on instantly. And see, everything that we know about electronics is vacuum tubes. You flip on the switch and you wait for everything to warm up. And I almost fell out of the chair because I know how to do electronics. I'm already a grad student, I understand this stuff, and nothing works like that. And I know this is different. I could see right away that this man plays a different game.
When Holoniak learned that Bardeen was going to set up a semiconductor laboratory, he rushed to join the group. Some of his fellow graduate students laughed at the idea.
You're nuts. That's not going anywhere. Well, of course, the joke now is on them.
At Illinois, John wanted to tackle a problem that had dogged him since graduate school. He wanted to solve the mystery of superconductivity.
If you got certain metals very cold, down near the absolute zero, that if you started an electric current flowing in a wire, that the current would keep on going even if you didn't have a battery. So it was like a perpetual motion machine. He was challenged by that thing, and it was a challenge against him.
It had been recognized from the very start as a key mystery of condensed matter physics. And just about everyone who had any kind of reputation in not just in condensed matter physics, but in physics generally, had a shot at explaining superconductivity.
Bardeen's thoughts were taken away from superconductivity when he heard the news on the morning of November 1st, 1956. He dropped a frying pan of eggs when he learned he had won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Bardeen, Bratton, and Shockley won for the invention of the transistor. When Bardeen returned from Stockholm, he achieved another lifelong goal, a hole-in-one. Years later, Charles Slichter was amazed to learn that some of Bardeen's golfing buddies did not know he had won a Nobel Prize. True to form, Bardeen did not brag on the course.
My feeling was that somehow or other, if I'd won a Nobel Prize, I would manage to get it into the conversation somehow.
In the next 3 months, Bardeen's good luck streak continued. He announced that along with Bob Schrieffer and Leon Cooper, he had solved a 45-year-old mystery that had puzzled the greatest minds in science. After winning the 1956 Nobel Prize for the invention of the transistor, Bardeen was eager to get back to work at Illinois. He felt his team was close to solving the mystery of superconductivity.
When they learned a lot about what was going on, but hadn't quite put all the pieces together, my father had a cocktail party for some visiting Russian scientists. My father seemed to be staring off into space every so often and didn't say very much. So he could tell that my father's mental wheels were turning. Saturday morning, I think Schrieffer got a call rather early in the morning saying, "I think I've solved it."
Bardeen ran into Charles Slichter in the hallway of the physics building.
I waited for him To say what it was, he was funny. And then finally he said, well, I think we've figured out superconductivity. That was, I suppose, one of the most exciting events in my whole scientific life.
Bardeen shared the credit for the theory with his doctoral student Bob Schrieffer and his postdoc Leon Cooper, and it became known as BCS.
It is one of the most important theoretical developments of the previous century. There's no doubt about it.
For the first time, scientists understood on a microscopic level how a material became a superconductor.
What you would like is to be able to make a power line out of superconducting wires.
You wouldn't waste any of the energy trying to get the electricity from the place where you generate it to the place where you use it.
On October 19, 1972, Bardeen learned he had become the first person to win a second Nobel Prize in physics. Bardeen, Cooper, and Schrieffer won for their theory of superconductivity.
And Leo Cardinal sent a wonderful note saying, on the second prize, congratulations, John. With the third, you get to keep the king.
In 1956, the king asked my mother, well, where's the family? And she said, oh, they're at home at school. And he said, well, next time bring them.
Bardeen returned to Illinois and continued teaching until March of 1975. In his retirement, he continued to be a leader in science by serving as an advisor to the Young Haloid Company, which became Xerox. He was also close to the Sony Corporation and made many trips to Japan. John Bardeen passed away on January 30th, 1991.
John was fulfilled, but certainly John was still driven. He was after Nobel Prize number 3. I think he was one of the greatest scientists of all time.
John Bardeen did a lot for the world. He did a lot for civilization. He did a lot for the future.
And he wasn't there trying to make the world better for Bardeen. He was trying to make the world better because we have to.
He wasn't just a scientist, he was a truly great human being.
Support for this program was provided by the College of Engineering, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Illinois in association with the Big Ten Network.